Welcome to this explainer. Today we're diving straight into a massive, frankly monumental deal, the December 2025 UK-US Pharmaceutical Trade Agreement. We're going to objectively unpack its far-reaching consequences, because this is a deal that touches on literally everything from international trade tariffs right down to the frontline budget of the National Health Service. It has sparked some intense debate across the pharma industry, the medical community, and the legal sphere. So we're going to look directly at the data, the economic logic behind it, and the resulting backlash to understand exactly what was agreed upon and why it really matters to you. Here is our roadmap for today. We'll start with the tariff threat, look at the economic promise, unpack the changes to NHS drug pricing, analyze the healthcare trade-off, and wrap up with the legal backlash.
So, what is the true cost of a trade deal? This core question is going to anchor our entire explainer today. Think about it. When a nation negotiates a trade treaty on the global stage, what domestic levers actually have to be pulled to make it happen? We're going to weigh the explicit trade-offs of this historic and highly controversial agreement, measuring the economic wins on one side against the calculated human and financial costs on the other.
Let's start with Section 1, the tariff threat. To really grasp the intense pressure the UK government was under, we have to look at the sheer scale of the trade relationship. Pharmaceuticals are not just some side hustle for the UK, right? They make up a massive 20% of the UK's £11 billion annual exports to the United States. That makes the entire life sciences sector absolutely critical to the British economy, but it also makes it highly vulnerable to international trade disputes. If that pipeline is threatened, the economic shockwaves would be severe. And the catalyst for this entire saga happened when Donald Trump threatened to cripple the British export industry with devastating 100% tariffs. This was under Section 301 and 232, which are basically aggressive trade laws used to penalize foreign commerce. It was a seriously high-stakes geopolitical game. The threat of effectively shutting out a fifth of the UK's exports to its largest trading partner created an immediate, urgent crisis for Whitehall. So, to avoid these devastating tariffs, a treaty was struck in December 2025, and it had a huge core exchange at its heart. The US offered a major concession. They would give 0% tariffs on UK pharmaceutical and medical device exports for 3 years. But in return, the UK had to make a massive domestic concession. The government committed to vastly increasing its domestic spending on new patented medicines, effectively agreeing to double that expenditure over the next decade. Moving on to Section 2, the economic promise. Now, the sheer scale of foreign investment triggered by this deal was almost immediate. Industry analysts pointed out that this successfully positioned the UK as a uniquely advantaged base for drug development. With that golden guarantee of tariff-free access to the US, multinational companies really doubled down on Britain. Bristol Myers Squibb alone committed over $500 million to the UK life sciences sector over 5 years. We also saw massive commitments roll in from Moderna and BioNTech. So for the government and the pharmaceutical industry, this deal is undeniably a triumph of inward investment. All right, Section 3, changing NHS drug pricing. To make all this work, there had to be a major structural shift. The National Institute for Health and Care Excellence, or NICE, evaluates whether new drugs are worth the money using something called a QLI, a Quality Adjusted Life Year. Basically, it's just a measure of 1 year of life in perfect health. Historically, NICE would approve a drug if it cost between £20,000 and £30,000 per QLI. But under this new deal, ministers instructed NICE to significantly increase that threshold, between £25,000 and £35,000. This means the NHS is now required to pay significantly more money to pharmaceutical companies for the exact same amount of health benefit. On top of that, there's a safety net mechanism called the Voluntary Scheme for Branded Medicines Pricing. It limits price inflation by having drug companies pay a rebate back to the NHS if spending grows too fast. Back in 2025, that rebate rate was set at 23%. Under the new agreement, it was slashed down to just 14.5%. So to put that in perspective, the NHS is now paying more upfront for drugs and getting less cash returned on the back end. Which brings us to Section 4, the healthcare trade-off. In health economics, there's this iron law known as opportunity cost. The NHS operates on a finite, publicly funded budget. That means every single extra pound spent on buying expensive new patented drugs is a pound taken directly away from existing frontline services. We're talking about the money used to pay for doctors and nurses, maintain hospital beds, or run routine cancer and diagnostic scans. Higher spending in one area inevitably takes away the opportunity to spend elsewhere. And the government's binding commitment locks in a pretty steep trajectory. The UK agreed to double NHS expenditure on new medicines as a share of the economy. It grows from 0.3% of GDP in 2025 to 0.4% by 2030, all the way up to at least 0.6% by 2036. The direction of travel is firmly locked in. A study from the British Medical Journal calculated exactly what that percentage shift means in cold, hard cash. Assuming standard economic growth, the researchers found that without a massive corresponding tax increase to expand the total NHS budget, this commitment is going to drain an astonishing £44.7 billion from general NHS care by the end of 2036. That is an enormous amount of money flowing right out of routine care and directly into pharmaceutical budgets. Tragically, researchers estimate this massive diversion of funds carries a profound human cost. By taking billions away from highly cost-effective preventative treatments like cheap medications to manage cardiovascular disease, which usually cost less than £7,000 per healthy year gained, and spending it on incredibly expensive patented drugs instead, the BMJ calculates this deal will result in 229,000 excess deaths in England alone over the next decade. That right there is the ultimate opportunity cost. Lives lost because the resources to save them were spent elsewhere to fulfill a trade obligation. Finally, Section 5, the legal backlash. The actual rollout of this deal followed a highly controversial timeline. After the deal was struck in December 2025, the government actually held back the internal cost data until just before the Easter bank holiday in April 2026. Then, instead of putting this massive healthcare change to a full vote in Parliament, ministers used a statutory instrument, which is a form of secondary legislation, to quietly pass it and strip NICE of its independence. In response to this lack of scrutiny, campaign groups launched a High Court judicial review in June 2026 to challenge the legality of the entire move. Campaign groups basically view these domestic healthcare reforms as an unlawful power grab. As Nick Darden from Global Justice Now put it, quote, "This is a government gambling with NHS patients' lives in a geopolitical game with Donald Trump." The core of their legal challenge is that bypassing parliamentary debate to fundamentally alter NHS drug pricing and effectively transferring billions from patient care to corporate balance sheets simply should not be done in the shadows. And commentators like Aditya Chakraborty in The Guardian have pointed out a stunning lack of democratic process. He called it, quote, "a massacre made in Whitehall, subject to almost zero democratic scrutiny." For many observers, the issue isn't even just the money, it's the precedent. It's the idea of a foreign trade threat dictating the internal health policies of a sovereign nation, without the public's elected representatives ever getting a chance to debate the true cost. So, as this explainer comes to a close, we are left with a pretty profound question. Where exactly should the line be drawn? On one hand, securing a nation's international economy and attracting pharma innovation is absolutely vital. On the other hand, as the data shows, funding domestic frontlines is quite literally a matter of life and death. How a society navigates that trade-off defines its priorities. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into the numbers, the laws, and the lives behind the headlines. Until next time, keep questioning what's really on the table.